The air in the Cargill grain elevator was thick enough to chew, a cocktail of rust, 10-year-old rat droppings, and the fine ghost-like dust of forgotten harvests. It coated my tongue, a gritty film that no amount of spitting could clear. My pulse rifle, the Negotiator, felt heavy and familiar in my grip, its polymer stock cool against my cheek. Below me on the graded catwalk that trembled with every shift of my weight, Frank Grisham was a monument of Kevlar and muscle, his M90 pulverizer held at a low ready. "Anything on your pinger, Ava?" Frank's voice was a low growl, muffled by his comms unit but still carrying the same gravelly impatience it always did. He hated waiting. He hated quiet. "Just us and the ghosts of 1,000 dead pigeons, Frank," came Ava Monroe's reply. Her voice was the calm in our storm, a steady signal in the static. From my perch on the third-floor landing, I could see the soft blue glow of her wrist-mounted diagnostic tool as she swept it across the cavernous silo chamber below. "Thermal's clean. No movement." "They're here," I said, my own voice sounding foreign after an hour of silence. "They're always here." This was the job, a routine sweep. Confluent City was a graveyard with a heartbeat, and we were the morticians tidying up the restless dead. The quarantine corps called us hunters, but we didn't hunt. We exterminated. We were pest control for the apocalypse. The pests the locals had christened the fault-marked were blind, pale things that had crawled out of the New Madrid fault when it tore the world in half. They were fast, they were strong, and they hated the light. Our squad, callsign Nighthawks, was the best. Frank was the hammer, Ava was the scalpel, and I was the ghost, the one who saw the patterns. "Owen's right," Ava said. "They're just deep. This place is a labyrinth of chutes and conveyors. They could be 10 feet below us and we wouldn't see a thermal signature through all this steel." I scanned the darkness, my eyes tracing the faint lines of machinery and collapsed infrastructure that my augmented reality visor highlighted in pale green. 10 years after the Great Shift, the world had learned the rules. Stay in the light. Stay above ground. Don't make a sound. The fault-marked had rewritten the survival guide. "All right, boss," Frank grunted. "What's the play?" "Standard pattern," I ordered. "Ava, get your shriekers ready. Frank, you're on the floodlight. I'll take point. We flush them up from the maintenance tunnels, you light them up and I'll put them down, by the numbers." We moved with a practiced economy of motion that spoke of hundreds of missions just like this one. Ava descended a service ladder, her slight frame moving with a dancer's grace. She placed 2 sonic grenades, the shriekers, at the mouth of a darkened conveyor tunnel. Frank unslung the heavy UV floodlight pack, the battery humming to life with a low thrum. He set it on its tripod, aiming the powerful lamp at the kill zone we had established in the center of the main floor. I dropped down to the catwalk below, landing without a sound, and moved towards the opposite side of the silo. My job was to be the bait, the disturbance that drove them from their hiding place. I reached the edge of a gaping hole in the floor, where a massive hopper had once fed grain into the bowels of the complex. Now it was just a black maw leading down into the darkness they loved. "Ready," Ava's voice crackled. "Ready," Frank confirmed. "On my mark," I said, unclipping a high-intensity flare from my belt. I struck the cap and tossed it into the hole. It fell for a second before igniting with a brilliant white magnesium fire, momentarily turning the subterranean world into a landscape of stark, dancing shadows. And then they came. The sound was first. A wet, chittering hiss that was too organic for this place of dead steel. They poured from the tunnel Ava had mined, a tide of bone-white flesh. They moved on all fours, their long limbs scrabbling against the concrete, Their featureless faces pointed towards the ceiling as their hypersensitive hearing tried to pinpoint us. There were 5 of them, a small nest. "Now, Ava!" I yelled. A high-frequency shriek, inaudible to human ears but agonizing to them, erupted from the tunnel mouth. The creatures recoiled, their eyeless heads thrashing. They writhed in silent torment, their senses overloaded. "Light 'em up, Frank." The UV floodlight blazed to life, bathing the kill zone in a harsh, violet glare. The effect was immediate and brutal. Their pale skin, never meant for any light, let alone concentrated ultraviolet, began to smoke and blister. They shrieked aloud this time, a sound like tearing canvas as the light burned them. This was my cue. I raised the negotiator, the targeting laser a steady red dot on the lead creature's chest. The rifle fired with a contained, percussive thump, 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 sending armor-piercing rounds downrange. The first marked collapsed, its head exploding in a spray of pale, thin ichor. The second and third went down an instant later. The remaining 2, driven by a pain that overrode their sonic agony, scrambled away from the light, trying to climb the walls. Frank swung the pulverizer up, and the heavy machine gun roared, spitting a stream of lead that tore one of them from the wall in a shower of concrete chips and mangled flesh. The last one was mine. It had almost reached the shadows of a massive gear assembly. I squeezed the trigger twice. The rounds hit it in the back and it tumbled to the floor, twitching before going still. Silence returned, thick and heavy. The only sounds were the hum of the floodlight and our own ragged breathing. "All clear," Ava announced, her voice a little shaky. It never got easy. "Good work, Hawks," I said, lowering my rifle. We descended to the main floor to confirm the kills. Frank prodded one with his boot. "Ugly bastards." Ava was already taking samples, her scanner humming as she passed it over one of the bodies. I knelt beside the last one I'd shot. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. A cold little knot of unease. "Owen?" Ava asked, noticing my focus. "This one," I said, pointing with the barrel of my rifle. "Look at it." Frank grunted. "Looks dead to me." "No, it's thin." It was true. The creature was emaciated. Its ribs were starkly visible beneath its translucent skin, the muscle tissue withered. The others were lean, wiry predators, but this one was skeletal. Its claws were worn down to nubs, and its teeth, usually long and needle-sharp, were chipped and broken. "Malnourished," Ava stated, looking at her scanner's readout. "Severely." "Vitally depleted. It looks like it hasn't fed in weeks." That was the detail. The tiny, jagged piece that didn't fit the puzzle. The woods and ruined suburbs around Confluence were teeming with feral dogs, deer, coyotes. The marked were apex predators in the dark. They didn't starve. Why would one be starving when there's a feast just outside the door? I mused aloud, more to myself than to them. Frank shrugged. Maybe it was sick. The runt of the litter. But I knew better. In their world, the sick and the weak were the first to be eaten by their own kind. A starving predator in a land of plenty wasn't a runt. It was a warning sign. It was an anomaly. And in my line of work, anomalies were what got you killed. The silence of the grain elevator suddenly felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was listening. Sleep is a luxury I surrendered 10 years ago. Back at the Quarantine Corps barracks, a fortified high-rise hotel that scraped the polluted sky over the safe zone, the others could find oblivion in their bunks. Frank would be snoring loud enough to rattle the window panes. Ava would be curled up, lost to dreams that I hoped were kinder than mine. But for me, the quiet hours were the loudest. They were when the ghosts came out to talk. I was cleaning the negotiator, the methodical, repetitive motion, a form of meditation. The scent of gun oil and carbon scoring was a familiar perfume. Outside, the city hummed its broken lullaby. The distant clang of a patrol vehicle, the low drone of the perimeter generators. Then, a heavy supply truck rumbled past on the street below, its diesel engine groaning, its worn-out suspension squealing over a pothole. The sound hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't the noise itself, but the vibration. The low, guttural tremor that traveled from the asphalt, up the concrete skeleton of the building, and into the soles of my boots. And just like that, I was gone. Not in the barracks anymore, but 10 years in the past, standing in a world that was about to die. The ground didn't just shake. That's what people who've never been through it say. An earthquake shakes. The great shift tore. It was a sound you felt in your bones before you heard it with your ears. A deep, resonant grind that seemed to come from the very core of the planet. I was an architect back then, on the 24th floor of a downtown office building, looking over blueprints for a new riverside development. One moment I was sipping lukewarm coffee. The next, the world was ending. The floor bucked like a living thing. The massive plate glass window in front of me didn't just shatter. It bowed inwards, held for a microsecond in an impossible curve, and then exploded into a million glittering shards. The roar was deafening, a symphony of destruction composed of twisting steel, screaming people, and the horrifying bass note of the earth itself splitting open. The skyscraper across the street folded in on itself, collapsing not down but sideways like a tired old man slumping into a chair. My only thought was of them. My wife, Sarah, my daughter Lily. Sarah was a teacher at Northwood Elementary. Lily was in her second grade class. The school was 3 miles away. 3 miles of a city that was actively committing suicide. I squeezed my eyes shut, the cold metal of my rifle's receiver a grounding anchor in the present. My knuckles were white. The truck was gone, but the phantom vibration remained, a tremor in my soul. I could still see it. I didn't take the stairs. I couldn't have. The stairwell was a concrete coffin, already filled with the screams of the trapped. I fought my way to the emergency exit to the fire escape. The air was a thick, choking cloud of pulverized concrete and God knows what else. Every breath was like inhaling broken glass. Outside, the fire escape swayed violently, bolts groaning as they were ripped from the brickwork. The view was apocalyptic. It was a scene from a disaster movie, only the special effects were real, and the extras were people I'd shared a morning commute with. A fissure, a jagged black wound, had opened up in the middle of 6th Street, swallowing cars, a city bus, and half a block of storefronts. It wasn't a crack. It was a chasm, impossibly deep, exhaling a strange, cold mist. I ran. I don't remember much of the journey. It was a blur of instinct and terror. Leaping over buckled pavement, scrambling over mountains of rubble that had been cars a minute before, ignoring the hands that reached out from beneath the debris. The screams became a background noise, a constant, horrible static. My only focus was the school. Sarah, Lily. I remembered Lily's dress that morning, yellow with little white daisies on it. She'd spun around in the kitchen, a blur of sunshine. Do I look pretty, Daddy? You look like a princess, sweetie. The memory was a knife twisting in my gut. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the air in the barracks feeling thin and sterile compared to the dust of that day. I forced myself back to the present, focusing on the intricate mechanics of my rifle's bolt carrier group. But the past wouldn't let go. It had me in its teeth. The school was gone. Not just collapsed. Gone. Where Northwood Elementary had stood with its cheerful red brick walls and manicured playground, there was now only the edge of the abyss. The Great Shift hadn't just shaken the city, it had redrawn the map. The chasm that had opened on 6th Street had forked and spread like lightning, and one of its hungry tendrils had found the school. I stood at the precipice, the ground still trembling beneath my feet. The playground swing set was still there, twisted and leaning precariously over the edge. One swing swayed gently in the dust-filled breeze, its chain making a soft, rhythmic squeak. A child's shoe, small and pink, lay half buried in the dirt nearby. I fell to my knees, the sharp edges of the broken asphalt digging into my flesh, but I felt nothing. I just stared into the blackness of the fault line. It was a wound in the world, and it had swallowed my world whole. Sarah with her kind eyes and easy laugh. Lily with her sunshine dress and missing front tooth. All of it gone. Devoured. I screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw, but my voice was just one more sound lost in the city's death rattle. I didn't see the first of the fault marked that day. I only heard the stories later from other survivors. Stories of pale, blind things crawling from the new chasms, drawn to the sounds of the wounded and the dying. By the time they emerged, my part of the city had fallen silent. There was nothing left for them to hunt. There was nothing left of me. I finished reassembling the negotiator, the final click of the receiver seeding into the stock sounding like a period at the end of a sentence. My hands were steady. The rage was gone, burned out long ago. In its place was something colder, harder, and infinitely more durable. A purpose. The chasm had taken everything from me. It had left a hole in my life, a fault line through my soul. And for 10 years, I had been throwing bodies into it, hoping one day it might finally be full. But the hole was deep, and it was still hungry. A week passed in a blur of routine patrols and uneasy quiet. The starving creature from the grain elevator was logged, filed, and forgotten by everyone but me. It was a splinter in my mind, a detail that snagged on the fabric of my thoughts. Frank seemed to notice my distraction. He found me in the armory, running a diagnostic on my armor's kinetic plating. "You're quiet," he said. Not a question, but a statement. He sat on a nearby workbench, the metal groaning under his weight, and began methodically disassembling his pulverizer. The rhythmic clicks and scrapes of metal on metal filled the space between us. Quieter than usual, I mean. Still thinking about that skinny crawler. It was wrong, Frank. "They're all wrong, Owen." That's kind of the point. He wiped a thick layer of carbon from the gun's gas piston. "You've been in this game as long as I have. You know they come in all shapes and sizes. You're looking for a monster in the closet when the whole damn house is haunted." He paused, squinting at the weapon part in his hand. Reminds me of the old days. Before we had the UV, the shriekers, all this fancy crap. Back when we just had bullets and bad ideas. His words were a key, unlocking a door in my memory I usually kept bolted shut. It swung open and the past bled into the present, cold and stark. The armory faded, replaced by the chaotic, smoke-choked streets of a city under siege. It was 3 months after the shift. The remnants of the government had finally started to organize. I'd enlisted in what was left of the Missouri National Guard, not out of any sense of patriotism, but because they gave me a rifle and pointed me at the things that had crawled out of my family's grave. We weren't the quarantine corps then. We were just soldiers, scared and out of our depth, fighting a war we didn't understand. Our first real engagement was a nightmare etched in my memory. We were tasked with clearing a subterranean parking garage beneath a collapsed federal building. The brass thought some vital records might have survived in a sub-basement vault. They sent in my platoon, 30 men armed with standard M4 carbines and the misplaced confidence of a bygone era. We had night vision goggles, flashlights, and absolutely no idea what we were walking into. The ramp leading down was a throat choked with debris. The air was cold, thick with the smell of stagnant water and something else, something that reminded me of an abattoir. We moved in tight formation, the beams of our flashlights cutting nervous, twitching circles in the oppressive dark. We found them on the 3rd level down, or rather they found us. There was no warning. One moment, the only sounds were our boots crunching on broken glass. The next, the darkness exploded. They came from behind parked cars, dropped from pipes on the ceiling, poured out of elevator shafts. They were silent. Our night vision was useless. It registered them as cold blurs against a cold background. All we could see were pale shapes moving with impossible speed in the frantic dance of our flashlight beams. We opened fire. The garage erupted in a deafening roar of gunfire, the muzzle flashes strobing, creating a horrifying slideshow of our own demise. The 5.56 rounds, designed to tumble and fragment in human flesh, just seemed to punch clean through the fault-marked. They barely seemed to notice. A man next to me screamed as a creature leaped onto his back, its claws tearing through his body armor as if it were paper. Another soldier was dragged into the shadows, his cries abruptly cut off by a sickening wet crunch. They weren't fighting us. They were butchering us. They were a force of nature. They flowed around our lines of fire, impossibly fast. They didn't use tactics. They were pure predatory instinct. They tore through us, a whirlwind of white limbs and snapping jaws. I saw my sergeant, a tough-as-nails veteran of 2 tours overseas, get his head torn from his shoulders. I saw men I'd trained with pulled apart like dolls. Panic shattered our discipline. It was a rout, a slaughter. I emptied my magazine into a creature that was disemboweling a private, and it just turned its featureless face towards me, its head cocked as if listening to my frantic heartbeat. I scrambled backward, tripping over a piece of rubble and falling hard. My rifle flew from my hands. I was dead. I knew it. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the claws, but they never came. I lay there, heart hammering against my ribs, hidden in the shadow of a wrecked ambulance. I could hear them. The wet, tearing sounds. The sharp cracks of bone. They were feeding. The platoon was gone in less than 2 minutes. I hid for what felt like an eternity, curled up beneath a pile of fallen ceiling tiles and ductwork, listening to the feast. And then, as the first faint hint of dawn began to filter down the collapsed ramps, they just left. They flowed back into the deepest parts of the garage, melting into the shadows as if the coming light was a physical barrier, a poison. I was the only one who walked out of that garage when the sun was fully up. I stumbled into the morning light, covered in dust and the blood of my friends, carrying the first terrible lesson we learned about the marked. They were creatures of absolute darkness, and light, pure, unfiltered sunlight, was their enemy. That was the day we stopped being soldiers and started being exterminators, I said, my voice low. The armory was back in focus. Frank had stopped cleaning his gun and was just looking at me, his usual cynical mask gone, replaced by a shared grim understanding. "Yeah," he said softly. "The federal building garage. I was with Charlie Company. We pulled out what was left of your platoon. Or what was left of what was left." We sat in silence for a moment, two old soldiers in a war that had no end. The lessons we had learned since that day, about their hypersensitive hearing, their weaknesses, their strengths, had all been paid for in blood. We had built our strategies and our technology on a mountain of our own dead. "You're right to be worried, Owen," Frank said, his voice regaining its gruff edge as he picked up his piston again. "Every time we think we've got these bastards figured out, they teach us a new lesson. And the tuition is a bitch." He was right. We had learned to fight them in the dark, but my gut told me we were still blind. That starving creature wasn't just an anomaly, it was a page turning. We were about to learn a new lesson, and I had a cold, sinking feeling that the price was about to go up. The call came 2 days later. The summons always felt like being called to the principal's office. The three of us stood in the sterile, white-walled briefing room on the top floor of the command center. The air here was always too clean, too cold, filtered of the city's grime and despair. It was a world away from the filth we waded through every day. Across a polished steel table sat Mr. Davenport, our liaison from what was left of the Department of Homeland Security. He was a man who looked like he'd been assembled from a kit of government-issue parts. Gray suit, gray hair, gray, emotionless eyes. He never looked at you directly, his gaze always fixed on the tablet in his hands, as if our faces were a distraction from the data we represented. "Good morning, Nighthawks," he said without looking up. His voice was as colorless as his suit. "We have a new priority assignment." He swiped a finger across his tablet and a holographic map of Confluence City shimmered to life above the table. A section of the industrial sector, a blighted wasteland of abandoned factories and rust-choked rail yards near the river, glowed red. "This area, designated Zone Gamma 7, has become a problem," Davenport continued, his tone flat. "Over the past 3 weeks, we've had a statistically significant increase in disappearances." Frank shifted his weight, his armor creaking in protest. "Disappearances? You mean snack time for the locals? What's the body count?" "That's the anomaly," Davenport said, and the word sent a jolt of cold electricity down my spine. "The count is 0. We've had 12 individuals go missing. All off-the-grid scavengers, but their disappearances were reported by associates. Quarantine Corps sweeps of their last known locations have turned up nothing. No bodies, no body parts, no blood trails. They are simply gone." Ava leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "That's not their style. The fault marked are messy. They're like sharks. They leave evidence." "Precisely," Davenport agreed, a flicker of something almost like interest in his eyes. "The pattern is inconsistent with established predatory behavior. It gets stranger. Local wildlife populations have also been affected. Our perimeter sensors have tracked multiple feral dog packs and even a coyote clan from the nearby Forest Park Reserve entering Zone Gamma 7. None have been tracked coming out. They vanish from the grid." I stared at the map, at the glowing red zone. It was centered on a specific point. "What's there?" I asked. Davenport zoomed in on the map. A skeletal network of lines appeared beneath the surface. The old Mercury subway line. It was a short-run commuter line that was decommissioned 30 years before the shift. The tunnels were sealed, but the earthquake would have cracked them wide open. The nexus of the disappearances is an abandoned maintenance hub for the line right here. A single point on the map pulsed with brighter light. Frank crossed his massive arms over his chest, a skeptical scowl on his face. So, let me get this straight. You want us to go spelunking in some rat-infested subway tunnel because a few vagrants and some wild dogs went missing? Sounds like the crawlers are just dragging their meals deeper into the cracks to eat. It's a waste of resources. Send in a drone. We did, Davenport said coolly. We lost contact with two of them approximately 500 feet into the main tunnel. No signal, no video feedback, just static. That got Frank's attention. Our drones were hardened military-grade machines. They didn't just go offline. But it was the other detail that was screaming at me. The missing people, the missing animals. It clicked into place with the image of that starving creature from the grain elevator. They weren't just dragging their food home. They're not messy killers, I said, the pieces falling together in my head with a grim logic. That's what we've always assumed. We find the half-eaten deer, the shredded remains of a scavenger, and we call it a kill site. We think they're animals, driven by pure instinct and hunger. Ava picked up my train of thought. But what if they're not? What if the mess they leave behind are just the scraps, the ones they don't take with them? Exactly, I said, looking at Davenport, who was now watching me, his gray eyes focused for the first time. They don't leave trails because they aren't killing their victims on sight. They're capturing them, taking them alive. The room was silent for a long moment. The implications of that idea were chilling. Hunting was one thing. Abduction implied a purpose beyond simple hunger. It implied intent. It implied intelligence. Frank scrubbed a hand over his jaw. Okay, that's creepy as all hell. But why? What for? That's what you're going to find out, Davenport said, his attention returning to his tablet. Your objective is to enter the Mercury line, locate the source of the disappearances, and neutralize it. Standard engagement protocols are authorized. I want to know what's down there, Pitt. We'll find it, I promised. As we filed out of the room, the weight of the new mission settled on my shoulders. Frank was still grumbling about it being a wild goose chase, but the bravado in his voice was gone. Ava was quiet, probably running scenarios and calculating risks on that brilliant internal computer of hers. I knew this was it. This wasn't a routine sweep. This was something new. The map we had been using to navigate this broken world, the one that defined the marked as simple subterranean predators, was wrong. We were walking into a place that was not on any of our charts, and I had the terrible feeling that down in the darkness of the Mercury line, a new map was being drawn, and we weren't the ones holding the pen. The entrance to the Mercury line was a concrete scar half hidden behind a collapsed warehouse. The steel doors that had once sealed it were twisted off their hinges, looking like the lid of a sardine can peeled back by a giant. A set of steep concrete stairs led down into a darkness that felt absolute, a solid wall of black that seemed to push back against the gray afternoon light. The air that wafted up from the opening was a physical presence. It was heavy and wet, carrying the cloying smells of a place that hadn't breathed fresh air in decades. Mold, rot, and the metallic tang of stagnant water were the top notes, but beneath them was something else. A faint, sickly sweet odor like overripe fruit left to decay in a damp cellar. It was an organic smell in a world of concrete and steel, and it was deeply wrong. Masks on, I ordered, my voice tight. We sealed our rebreathers, and the hiss of filtered air was a small comfort. Frank hefted his pulverizer. "Ladies first," he grunted, gesturing to the stairs with his gun barrel. I took point, switching on the headlamp mounted to my helmet. Its powerful beam cut a cone of white light into the gloom, but the darkness seemed to drink it in, leaving the edges fuzzy and indistinct. We descended, our boots echoing unnaturally in the confined space. The silence was profound, a crushing weight that made the sound of my own heartbeat feel like a drum. It was the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. The stairs opened onto a station platform. It was a time capsule from another world. Faded advertisements for products that no longer existed peeled from the tiled walls. A skeletal newsstand was covered in a thick blanket of dust. A public payphone, an ancient relic, dangled from its armored cord. Everything was coated in a fine gray silt, the dust of the great shift that had found its way down here. "Place gives me the creeps," Frank muttered over the comm. Ava had her pinger out, its blue light sweeping across the platform. No life signs. No thermal traces. But the air. Owen, the particulate count is off the charts. It's saturated with some kind of unknown organic spore. "Hostile?" I asked. "Indeterminate. But I wouldn't recommend taking your mask off for a deep breath." My light played across the walls, and that's when we saw it. Streaks of a dark, resinous substance like thick black tar coated sections of the tile. It wasn't a stain, it was a secretion. It glistened wetly in our lights, and in some places it had hardened into a semi-translucent amber-like material. Ava moved closer to one of the streaks, her scanner humming. "This is bizarre. It's a complex protein polymer, but nothing in my database matches it. It's warm." She reached out a gloved finger and gently touched the substance. "It has the consistency of cooling sap. And look." She pointed her light at the floor in front of the wall. The concrete was scored with deep parallel grooves. They were drag marks. Several sets of them, all leading from the platform edge and into the yawning black mouth of the subway tunnel. "Something was dragged," I stated the obvious. "Something heavy," Frank added, kneeling to get a closer look. "And whatever it was kicking." He pointed to a series of frantic, scuffing scratches within the main grooves. But it was what wasn't there that was most disturbing. There was no blood. Not a single drop. The scenes of a fault-marked attack were always painterly in their violence, Jackson Pollock canvases of red on gray. But this was clean. Too clean. It was the sterile evidence of an abduction, not a slaughter. "The smell is stronger here," Ava said, her voice strained. The sickly sweet odor was emanating from the dark resin. We followed the drag marks to the edge of the tunnel. The tracks descended onto the gravel of the rail bed, heading into the ink-black void. This was the point of no return. This was where the drones had gone silent. "Okay, new rules," I said, my squad automatically turning their attention to me. "We move in a tight diamond formation. Frank, you take rear guard. Ava, you're in the middle, I'm on point. Eyes everywhere. No unnecessary comm chatter. If you see something, tap your comm twice for attention, 3 times for contact. Are we clear?" 2 clicks answered me in my earpiece from each of them. Clear. We stepped off the platform and into the tunnel. The world immediately shrank to the focused beams of our lights. The air grew even heavier, the silence more absolute. The only sounds were the crunch of our boots on the gravel ballast and the steady rhythmic hiss of our rebreathers. The walls of the tunnel were slick with moisture and coated in more of the strange resin, which seemed to pulse with a faint internal warmth. It was as if the tunnel itself were becoming organic, turning from a man-made passage into the gullet of some titanic beast. We moved forward for what felt like miles, but my helmet's display told me it was only a few hundred yards. The drag marks continued, a clear path leading us deeper into the dark. Ava's comm clicked twice. We all froze, weapons up. I swept my light in a wide arc. Nothing. "What is it?" I whispered into my mic. "The resin," she said, her voice barely a breath. "It's humming. There's a low-frequency energy signature coming from it. It's faint, but it's there, and it's interfering with my scanner's higher functions. It's like a low-level jamming field. That would explain the lost drones. This stuff wasn't just a secretion. It was a tool, a piece of some bizarre alien ecosystem. We pushed on, the sense of dread tightening its cold grip around my chest. We passed a rusted signal box, its lights long dead, and on it, something was scrawled in the thick layer of grime. It was a single word scratched with a fingernail, it looked like. Help. The letters were shaky, desperate. And below them, the grime was smeared, as if the person who wrote it had been dragged away before they could finish. Frank let out a low whistle. So much for a wild goose chase. I didn't answer. I just stared at that word. It was a final, desperate message from a world of light, sent from the very edge of a world of darkness. And we were walking right into it. The air was getting warmer, and the sweet, rotten smell was getting stronger. We were getting close. The tunnel forked ahead of us. The main line curved gently to the right, while a smaller maintenance spur broke off to the left, blocked by a heavy, rusted gate that was bent open just enough for a person to squeeze through. The drag marks and the thickest concentrations of the black resin led through the gate. "That's our path," I said, pointing my rifle. "Ava, any readings?" "The energy signature is much stronger in that direction," she confirmed. "And I'm picking up motion. Multiple contacts, about 60 feet past the gate." My comm clicked 3 times fast. It was Frank. "Contact rear." We spun around. At the edge of our light, back the way we'd come, a pale form detached itself from the shadows. Then another, and another. They weren't charging us. They were just appearing, materializing from the darkness like ghosts, blocking our only retreat. "They herded us," I growled, realizing the trap. "They let us walk right into the kill box." There were 4 of them, their bone-white bodies stark against the blackness. They didn't make a sound, just stood there, their featureless faces aimed in our direction, sensing us with faculties we couldn't comprehend. "Light 'em up," Frank roared, opening fire with the pulverizer. The tunnel erupted with thunder and light. The heavy rounds chewed up the gravel and ricocheted off the concrete walls with angry whines. One of the marked was caught in the stream of fire and was torn to pieces. The other 3 reacted instantly. One scrambled up the curved wall of the tunnel, moving with the speed of an insect. The other 2 charged, low to the ground. "Ava, shrieker!" I yelled, firing my negotiator at the one on the wall. My round sparked against the concrete around it as it moved with uncanny speed. Ava threw a sonic grenade. It landed with a clatter, and the silent, high-frequency pulse washed over the creatures. They staggered, disoriented, shaking their heads. It bought us a precious second. I snapped off 2 more shots, and the wall crawler tumbled to the ground in a heap. The last 2 were almost on us. My rifle thumped, and one of them fell. Its leg shattered. It collapsed, hissing, and began dragging itself forward with its arms. But the last one was different. It ignored Frank's suppressing fire, ignored the sonic agony, and launched itself directly at me. It was a suicidal, desperate charge. I didn't have time to aim. I just fired from the hip, a 3-round burst that caught it square in the chest. Its momentum carried it forward, and its dead weight slammed into me, knocking me back against the tunnel wall. I shoved the corpse off me, my ears ringing, the smell of its thin, strange blood sharp even through my rebreather.
"Status," I yelled, getting back to my feet. "I'm good,"
Frank answered, still firing short, controlled bursts down the tunnel to keep any others at bay. "I'm fine," Ava said, her voice steady. "Owen, look." I followed her gaze. The one I had crippled was still alive. It was trying to crawl towards us, not with aggression, but with a horrifying, desperate energy. But it wasn't crawling towards us. It was crawling towards the gate. It was trying to put its body between us and the maintenance tunnel. And that's when it all clicked into place. The final, terrifying piece of the puzzle. My blood ran cold. "Hold your fire, Frank," I ordered.
"What? Are you crazy, Owen? Let me finish it." "Hold your fire."
The guns fell silent. The only sound was the wounded creature panting and scrabbling at the gravel, dragging its ruined body an inch at a time. It was ignoring us completely. Its entire being was focused on one single task: blocking the path. I raised my rifle and put a single, precise round through its head. It went still. "They weren't trying to kill us," I said, my voice hollow. The realization washed over me with the force of a physical shock. That wasn't an ambush. Ava understood immediately. "They were trying to drive us back," she whispered, her eyes wide behind her visor. "The attack was a diversion. The ones behind us were a wall. They were trying to scare us off, make us retreat." Frank lowered his weapon, confusion warring with shock on his face. "Defenders? You're saying these things were... what? Guarding something?" It flew in the face of everything we knew about them. For 10 years, they had been the monster in the dark, the mindless predator, the thing that hunted and killed with no thought beyond its next meal. We were the hunters, the ones who went into the dark places to cleanse them. But here, in this suffocating tunnel, the roles had been reversed. They hadn't herded us into a kill box. They had let us walk past a line, a perimeter, and had then tried to force us back over it. Their attacks weren't frenzied assaults. They were short, violent, targeted charges designed to push, not to surround and annihilate. The one that had charged me wasn't trying to tear me apart. It was trying to knock me back, to physically move me away from the gate. They were protecting whatever lay down that maintenance tunnel, protecting it with their lives. "We're not the hunters anymore," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. A new, more profound fear began to settle in my gut. It was the fear of the unknown. The monster you know is one thing, but the one you've completely misunderstood, that's something else entirely. "Whatever is through that gate," I said, turning to face the darkness of the spur line, "they think it's worth dying for." And with that chilling thought, we squeezed through the bent metal bars, leaving the world we thought we knew behind us and stepping into theirs. The maintenance tunnel was narrower, the air thick and warm, like the breath of a large animal. The black resin coated everything here, dripping from the ceiling in thick, viscous strands and forming a slick, organic carpet on the floor. Our boots made soft, squelching sounds with every step. The sickly sweet smell was overpowering, and the low-frequency hum Ava had detected was now a tangible vibration that we could feel in the soles of our feet. After about 100 feet, the tunnel opened abruptly into a vast cavernous space. It wasn't a man-made chamber. It was a natural limestone cave that the subway construction must have broken into decades ago. The ceiling was lost in the darkness above us, studded with stalactites that looked like long, dark teeth. This was a place born of geology and time, a secret pocket of the deep earth. And it had been turned into a nightmare. "By God," Frank whispered, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. The chamber was a forest of grotesque shapes. All along the curving walls, from the floor to as high as our lights could reach, were dozens of large, oblong cocoons. They were fashioned from the same dark, semi-translucent resin, and they glowed with a faint internal luminescence like monstrous fireflies. Inside each one, a silhouette was visible. We moved forward, our weapons held tight, stepping carefully between the pulsating structures. I approached the nearest one. It was at eye level, attached to the wall by thick root-like tendrils of the same resinous material. Inside, suspended in the amber gloom, was a man. He was dressed in the ragged clothes of a scavenger. His eyes were closed, his face slack, but his chest was moving. A slow, shallow rise and fall. "He's alive," Ava breathed, coming up beside me. She raised her pinger, its blue light playing over the cocoon. "Vitals are slow but stable. He's in some kind of induced coma, a hibernation state." We swept our lights across the chamber. It was a gallery of horrors. In one cocoon was a woman, her face a mask of peaceful terror. In another, a coyote, its fur matted, its body perfectly preserved. A whole pack of feral dogs was suspended in a large cluster of smaller pods near the floor. The missing people, the missing animals, they were all here. They weren't food. They were provisions. "It's a larder," I said, the word feeling utterly inadequate. "A living pantry." The fault-marked weren't just killing and eating, they were harvesting. They were collecting living creatures, preserving them in these organic pods for something. This level of organization, of foresight, was beyond anything we could have imagined. This wasn't the behavior of a simple predator. This was agriculture. Frank moved deeper into the chamber, his light probing the shadows. "This is messed up on a whole new level. Why keep them alive?" "Freshness," Ava offered, her voice trembling slightly. "Maybe I don't know. Maybe they need them living for some reason." My eyes followed the thick tendrils that anchored the cocoons to the wall. They weren't just anchors. They snaked across the floor and walls, all converging, like countless veins and arteries, towards a single larger tunnel at the far end of the cavern. The hum was strongest from that direction. The air that drifted out of it was hot and humid, carrying the scent of a slaughterhouse and something else. Something primal and ancient like potting soil and blood. They're not just being stored, I realized, my gaze fixed on that dark passageway. The tendrils weren't just holding the cocoons. They were connected to them like IV lines. They're being fed upon, slowly. Something is drawing sustenance from them. A cold, horrifying image flooded my mind. A giant spider, its web filled with twitching silk-wrapped flies, draining them of life over days. We had stumbled into the larder of a creature far more sophisticated and patient than the mindless killers we were used to. The ones we had fought in the tunnel weren't just guards. They were worker ants, soldiers, foragers, all serving a single central purpose. And that purpose lay down that tunnel. "We need to report this," Ava said urgently, fumbling with the communications panel on her wrist. "Command needs to know. They need to bomb this whole place back to the Stone Age." She tapped at her screen. "Nothing. The interference is too strong. I can't get a signal out." Of course she couldn't. We were deep inside the web, deep inside the creature's body, the resin, the hum. It was all part of its biology, designed to isolate it, to protect it. Then we have to finish this ourselves, I said, my voice hard. My hate, which had been confused and diluted by the recent discoveries, now came roaring back, sharper and more focused than ever. Whatever was at the heart of this, it was an abomination. It was a cancer in the bedrock of the earth. "Finish it?" Frank said, his voice incredulous. "Oh, and we don't even know what it is. We have a dozen rounds of ammo left between us and a couple of grenades. We're out of our league here." "We are the Quarantine Corps, Frank," I said, turning to face him, my eyes locking on his. "This is the quarantine. This is the disease. We cut it out. Now." I didn't wait for an answer. I started walking towards the dark tunnel, towards the source of the heat and the humming. I could feel the thrumming in my teeth now, a deep bass vibration that resonated with the very marrow of my bones. Frank and Ava exchanged a look, a silent conversation between two people who had followed me into hell more times than they could count. Then, I heard their footsteps squelching in the resin behind me. We left the silent, breathing pantry behind us and walked into the throat of the beast, drawn deeper into the heart of a horror we had only just begun to understand. The final tunnel was not a tunnel. It was a birth canal. The walls were no longer rock, but a pulsating, fleshy membrane coated in the same black resin, which here was interwoven with a network of thick, cable-like veins that pulsed with a faint, sickly green light. It was like walking through the aorta of some leviathan. The air was hot, steamy, and thick with the smell of amniotic fluid and decay. The low hum we had been following was now a deep, rhythmic thudding sound. Thump, 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 thump. The sound of a colossal heart. The passage opened into another, even larger cavern, and what we saw there broke the last of our understanding of the world. The cavern was a womb. It glowed with a soft, internal bioluminescence, the light emanating from the very walls and from the countless organic cables that crisscrossed the space like a monstrous spider's web. These were the same tendrils we had seen in the larder, but here they were as thick as a man's arm, all converging on the chamber's center. Suspended in the middle of the cavern, held aloft by this impossible network of organic cables, was the source of the heartbeat. It was a vast, leathery sack, the size of a city bus, its skin a mottled, translucent gray. It was a womb, a chrysalis, an egg. It was all of those things and none of them. It contracted and expanded in time with the rhythmic thudding that echoed through the chamber, and with each contraction, the green light in the feeder cables would pulse, carrying a cargo of life force siphoned from the living pantry. Inside its semi-transparent walls, a great and terrible shadow moved sluggishly, a nascent form curled in on itself. This was the heart of the nest. This was the queen.
"No," Ava breathed, her voice a mixture of scientific awe and pure terror. "It's not a queen. A queen lays eggs. This is a gestating chamber, a biological factory."
She was right. The fault mark we had been fighting for a decade, the pale, blind creatures of instinct, were not the species. They were a caste. They were the workers, the soldiers, the drones. Their entire existence, the hunting, the harvesting, the guarding, was dedicated to this single, obscene purpose, to feed this thing, to nurture the horror growing within it. "We've been fighting the puppets," I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. "This is the puppeteer." My hatred, the fuel that had burned in me for 10 years, felt small and insignificant in the face of this. My personal tragedy, the loss of my family, was just a footnote in a saga I couldn't comprehend. We hadn't been fighting a war against monsters. We had been swatting at flies while the real beast grew fat and strong in the darkness beneath our feet. Frank unslung the last of his heavy explosive charges from his pack. His face was pale, his jaw set in a grim line. "Well, I don't care what it is. I know what we have to do." The plan was simple. It was desperate. It was all we had. We had to get to the base of that matron, plant our remaining charges on the primary feeder cables, and hope the explosion would be enough to kill it. A surgical strike against a cancerous god. "Ava, find the thickest conduits," I ordered, my voice regaining its edge. Command and purpose were the only things holding back the tide of insanity that threatened to drown me. "Frank, you're with me. We'll provide cover." "Cover from what?" he grunted, scanning the empty chamber. "The welcoming committee is all dead." As if in answer to his question, a low, wet, tearing sound echoed from the far side of the chamber. From a dark opening in the fleshy wall, more of them emerged. But these were different. They were larger, their skin a darker shade of gray, and their limbs were thicker, more powerful. "Royal Guards," Ava whispered. There were 3 of them. They didn't charge. They moved slowly, deliberately, positioning themselves between us and the pulsating sack. They were a living wall, a final line of defense. "So much for the easy way," Frank said, chambering around in his pulverizer. "There was never an easy way," I replied, raising my negotiator.
"Ava, go, now. We'll buy you time." Ava didn't hesitate. She sprinted to the right, keeping low, her scanner already out as she began to analyze the tangle of conduits, looking for the most vital ones.
The 3 guards turned their featureless faces towards her. They let out a coordinated, chittering hiss, a sound that was less a threat and more a command. And from the shadows around them, dozens of the smaller, paler marked began to pour into the chamber. They swarmed from hidden tunnels and recesses in the fleshy walls, their claws scrabbling for purchase. It was never just the 3 guards. It was the entire nest. They were protecting their future. And we were standing in the delivery room. The heart of the nest beat on, its rhythm a steady, patient countdown to a birth that would change the world forever. And we were about to be the bloody afterbirth. The chamber descended into chaos. Frank opened up with the pulverizer, the weapon's roar a defiant shout against the chittering tide. The heavy rounds tore through the first wave of pale drones, their thin bodies disintegrating under the onslaught. I fired in controlled bursts, my negotiator taking down the ones that tried to flank us, their eyeless faces a canvas for my hate. "I've found it!" Ava yelled over the comm, her voice strained against the cacophony. "There's a primary cluster of conduits on the far side. If we can sever them, it should trigger a catastrophic biofeedback." She was across the chamber, a small, determined figure kneeling at the base of the colossal womb, frantically wiring a demolition charge to a pulsating nexus of organic cables as thick as tree trunks. The Royal Guards moved. They ignored us, their focus entirely on Ava. They moved with a terrifying grace, their larger bodies not slowing them down in the slightest.
"Frank, the gods!"
I shouted, turning my fire on the lead creature. My rounds struck its chest, but they didn't penetrate. They sparked and ricocheted off a subdermal layer of chitinous armor we'd never seen before. It didn't even flinch. "These things are tough," Frank bellowed, swinging his gun around. The pulverizer hammered against the guards, but they weathered the storm of bullets, only slightly slowed by the sheer kinetic force. One of them reached Ava. She saw it coming, drawing her sidearm and firing point blank at its head. The pistol shots were like pebbles against a tank. The guard swatted her aside with a casual, brutal sweep of its arm. She flew through the air and slammed into the fleshy wall with a sickening thud, her body going limp. A white-hot rage, purer and more intense than anything I had felt since the day of the shift, surged through me. "Ava!" I charged, firing my rifle until the magazine ran dry, screaming a raw, incoherent curse. The guard turned to me, its featureless face a blank slate for my fury. And then the beating of the great heart stopped. A sudden profound silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the panting of the remaining drones. A deep, groaning tremor ran through the giant sack. The skin, stretched taut, began to ripple and tear. A long, vertical split appeared, leaking a thick, viscous fluid that steamed when it hit the floor. "Owen, it's hatching," Frank said, his voice a horrified whisper. We had run out of time. The tear widened with an explosive crackle like 1,000 sheets of leather ripping at once. From the breach, a claw emerged. It was long and black, curved like a scythe and easily 6 feet in length. Then another. They dug into the edges of the opening, pulling it wider. A head emerged from the fluid-filled interior. It was long and narrow, its skin a patchwork of pale flesh and glossy black chitinous plates. But the most terrible thing, the detail that shattered the last of my sanity, was that it wasn't featureless. It had eyes. 2 large, milky white orbs, devoid of pupils that slowly swiveled, blinking as they adjusted to the cavern's dim light. They were ancient and intelligent, and filled with a terrifying alien malice. They focused on the beams of our helmet lamps, not with pain, but with curiosity. The creature hauled its immense body out of the ruptured womb. It was 3 times the size of a royal guard, a horrifying fusion of insectoid armor and vertebrate anatomy. It stood on 2 powerful digitigrade legs, its long arms ending in those terrible scythe-like claws. It took a breath, its chest expanding, and then it let out a roar. It wasn't the mindless shriek of the drones. It was a deep, resonant, and completely sentient cry of dominance and birth. A king announcing its arrival. The UV floodlights and sonic grenades we'd used for a decade were useless novelties against this. This was an evolution, a final form. It took a step, its massive feet thudding on the cavern floor and its white eyes fixed on Frank. "For Sarah," Frank whispered, a final quiet prayer into the calm. He aimed the pulverizer at the creature's head and held down the trigger, pouring every last round he had into it. The creature raised an arm, shielding its face. The bullets, which could tear a drone in half, sparked and whined against its armored plating, doing nothing. When the gun clicked empty, the creature lowered its arm. It moved with a speed that defied its size, a black blur crossing the 20 feet between them in an instant. The scythe-like claw swept down. Frank and his gun were bisected in a single clean motion. I was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming horror. My mind simply couldn't process the reality of what I was seeing. The new king turned its head, its milky eyes finding me. It took a step in my direction. Then, a faint beeping sound cut through the silence. A small red light blinked on the charge Ava had managed to set. Her final act. With a deafening roar, the explosives detonated. It wasn't enough to destroy the creature, but the blast tore through the conduit nexus. The fleshy wall behind the new king erupted in a shower of gore and ichor. A section of the ceiling, destabilized by the explosion, groaned and began to collapse. The king roared in fury, turning toward the blast. The distraction was all I needed. I scrambled backward, my survival instincts finally kicking in. A shower of rock and organic matter rained down from above. I saw a narrow fissure, a ventilation shaft or a geological crack, exposed by the explosion. Without thinking, I threw myself into it, sliding and tumbling down a rough-hewn passage. The last thing I saw before the main passage collapsed behind me, sealing me in darkness, was the king's white eyes, burning with a cold, intelligent fury, promising a world of pain. The king had been born, and the first thing it had learned was our faces. The journey back to the surface was a fever dream of pain and darkness. I crawled and squeezed through miles of claustrophobic rock fissures and forgotten service tunnels, guided only by instinct and the faint ghost of an upward draft. My leg was broken, my ribs were a concert of agony, and the blood from a deep gash on my head had dried into a stiff, crusty helmet. I lost track of time. Hours or days, it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the image burned onto the back of my eyelids, the king's white, intelligent eyes. When a Quarantine Corps patrol found me, collapsed in the rubble of a collapsed sewer outlet 3 miles from the Mercury line, I was barely human. I was a ghost, haunted by the future I had seen. Now I sit in a sterile white room in the Corps medical wing. The air is clean, the sheets are crisp, and every surface gleams under the cold, fluorescent lights. It's a world away from the warm, breathing darkness I just crawled out of. But the darkness is inside me now. It's a permanent stain. Across from me, in a hard-backed chair, sits Mr. Davenport. He looks the same as he always does. Gray suit, gray hair, gray eyes that are currently fixed on the datapad in his lap, where my preliminary painkiller-fueled report is displayed. He hasn't looked at me once. A larder, he says, his voice as sterile as the room. Cocoons. A central womb. You're certain of these biological structures? I saw them, I say, my voice a dry rasp. It feels like I haven't used it in years. Ava analyzed them before. The names of my team are caught in my throat, shards of glass. Frank. Ava. They are ghosts now, standing in the corner of the room, their faces accusing. And this new entity, Davenport continues, swiping a finger across his screen, larger, armored, intelligent, with ocular organs. It has eyes, I confirm. My own stare is fixed on the blank white wall behind his head. If I look at him, I might shatter. It thinks. It watched us. It learned. Sergeant Grisham and Specialist Monroe were formidable operatives, Davenport states, a line in a report. This creature dispatched them with ease. It executed them, I correct him. It was a king holding court. We were just the opening ceremony. Finally, he looks up from his datapad. His gray eyes meet mine, and for the first time, I see a flicker of something in them. Not emotion. Just cold, hard calculation. What are our chances, Pitt? A direct assault. We can seal the area, drop a thermobaric device down the main shaft. We can collapse the entire network. What are the chances of destroying this new specimen? A sound escapes my lips. It might be a laugh or a sob. It's a broken, ugly noise. The question is so absurd, so profoundly naive, that it snaps the last thread of the man I used to be. The man who thought this was a war we could win. Chances? I echo. And this time, the laugh is real, a bitter, hollow rattle. You're still thinking in terms of winning. I lean forward, ignoring the fire in my ribs. I want him to see my eyes. I want him to see the abyss that's staring back out of them. You don't understand. We've been wrong about everything. For 10 years, we've been patting ourselves on the back, calling ourselves hunters, the lanterns in the dark. We thought we were holding the line, fighting back the tide. I shake my head slowly. The starving creature we found in the grain elevator. It wasn't a runt. It was obsolete. The drones in that nest weren't just guards. They were a culling crew. They were clearing out the old model, the mindless predators, to make way for the new one. They weren't just surviving the apocalypse we thought they were a part of. They were building a new world. Davenport's expression doesn't change, but his stillness is absolute. He is listening. We thought we were fighting for survival, I continue, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We were wrong. We weren't the protagonists of this story. We were the janitors. We were the exterminators clearing out the pests so the real owners could move in. All those nests we've cleared, all those creatures we've killed for a decade, we were just tilling the soil. We were clearing the path for the king. I lean back, the last of my energy gone. My hate is gone, burned away in that cavern. In its place is a terrible, vast, and empty clarity, an understanding that is 100 times heavier than grief. So, no, Mr. Davenport. We can't destroy it. That thing that's sitting in the dark beneath our feet right now, it's not the last of them. It's the first. It's their Adam. And we just delivered the apple. I look at my hands, at the dirt still caked beneath my fingernails, the dirt from the grave of my world. The war isn't coming, I say, my voice flat and dead. It's already over. We just lost it before we even knew we were supposed to be fighting.